restaurants.
Say something.
They got 10 Popeyes, 5 Dunkin' Donuts.
Say something.
You want me to say something?
How many steakhouses?
Well, she has to interview me first, right? You gotta ask me the question.
You won't say that, Jay.
Greatest teacher ever.
That's true.
Yeah. Yeah, let's go. Go.
My schooling process was really complicated. I entered the school system speaking another language. So that language was my predominant language, Cape Verdean Creole. First literacy educators were my grandparents, you know, and then my parents, and this is the way I was taught. I didn't receive an education in school. I was receiving my education in home. Rather than talk about just the negative parts of my experiences, I'd like to talk about the ways that I had some educators who were formative in becoming who I was, and I'll name them by name. Mrs. Delaney, she allowed a space for us to bring whatever stories we were being told at home into that classroom. And so she was probably one of the first educators who I had who realized that it was important for students who were coming from different cultural backgrounds to see themselves in the curriculum and to not see themselves as being deficient in terms of that. But what happened with the Reagan politics was that these programs lost funding. If you were poor and you were black and you were coming up in a certain place, you didn't get the resources of other schools, right? My anger and frustrations more had to do with the system. Already at that age, it had to do with the system more than any ways that I was seen as deficient. And the school couldn't wrap their head around it because they were doing IQ tests and they're like, oh, you know, she really belongs 3 levels ahead of where she was. But behavior-wise, I was just really struggling with the stuff that I saw, just like injustices. So I had a special desk right next to Mrs. Hopp's desk because I had moments. And these moments, I think any other teacher would have said, I'm sending you to the principal's office, you're getting suspended, you're getting whatever. But she would have me next to her, so when I had the moments, we could talk and walk through them. Though I'll admit, I wasn't always the talk and walk through person. A bunch of us that were carrying over into high school, obviously, you know, you come from different middle schools, we had this strong commitment to, you know, fighting racism, and going back into the community and teaching younger kids through, you know, skits, through poetry. Sometimes it was about also teaching our own peers. I was president of the African American Club, and what we did is we created our own youth in school based tutoring system where we taught from our own cultural literacies to basically get our students of color to do well academically and to deal with things like the high pregnancy rates and the high incarceration of black males. That idea of community give back and that idea of doing community work was already well ingrained in me. And they stayed with me all the way up until I went to college. For most of my years at BC, I was really, really quiet. I did do a lot of stuff in student organizations and student groups, but we felt like a large amount of racism on that Catholic university campus. Things like priests depicting black people as responsible for genocide because they had pictures of like black women going to the abortion clinics and, you know, just putting that out in newspapers, circulating at the time when we were supposed to take in midterms and finals, and that created protests. We were being mentored by graduate students, and what we did is we pushed for curricular changes. For the most part, the education consists of very like Western and dominant, you know, texts. And what happens with that is if you don't write or you don't give information back in terms of those contexts, your grade, right, suffers. And so I was always an advocate for that. I would make it really clear when I was writing something that I know you're not going to like this, but this is what I'm going to do. I know that this is not what you did in your classroom, and you completely, excluded this other history, and you excluded, people of color, but because you did that, I'm writing it in. It took years for that to happen, but my cousins, my literal cousins, have been the benefactors of that. So the protests that we had on campus, the sit-ins, the marching to the president's office, the calling on the news stations, it worked. But then I found myself in grad school sitting in a creative writing program that didn't really acknowledge spoken word. They were stamping out that critical pedagogy. They were stamping out that liberation theology. They were like, we're not gonna have you come out of this institution and promote yourself that way. And my whole problem was like, well, why did you take me? Because you knew that that's what I came here to do. So, whereas nationally they were excited about the hip hop pedagogy, they were excited about the critical pedagogy. What people don't realize is when you walked into predominantly white institutions and you walk into a certain set, that stuff is considered very subversive. It's considered very radical. The institutions don't want you in here. And so what happens is that your spaces, just like this barbershop, your spaces of education really happen outside of those walls. I was 24 when I got my first tenure track position. And I didn't care about the policies, I didn't care about the faculty handbook. I told them when they interviewed me, I'm gonna do my own thing regardless. So if you can't handle that, then you don't need to hire me. Before you change your life, you gotta change your mind. You gotta think your way of thinking, right? I can only speak it personally in terms of what I do, but I do a lot of African-centered stuff. So for me, it can be, the call and response, sort of like, I'm telling you this, what do you think about it? Versus just saying, this is what you have to believe and this is what you have to do because this is the way it is. Pretty much the content of the course is dictated by them. The ways that the conversations go in the classroom dictated by them. That type of pedagogy is risky, right? Because you can't really ever tell what's going to happen in a classroom, but it really empowers the student and puts them in charge of their own education. So to me, my best classrooms have been the ones, I talk about this TRIO program I taught in. It was a moment where they told me, these kids, you kidding me? These kids aren't gonna read more than 2 pages a day. These kids are not going to write for you. You talking about kids who are coming from, places where, their parents were incarcerated, their parents have, substance abuse. You're talking about, a 13-year-old girl who has a child. And I was like, but that's because you guys are not giving them something that they can relate to. It's one of my favorite moments just because people didn't believe in them. They didn't believe in their ability to be able to write. They didn't believe in their ability to be able to be interested and engaged, but they showed clearly that they were invested not in schooling, but their own education.
How's that going? You won't say that, Jay.